There were moments in life Sophie never expected to remember, the tiny ones, the accidental ones, the ones that felt like nothing until they shifted something inside her. But she would come to remember this one. Not for its logic, or timing, or even what she said, but for the way her breath faltered before she understood why. It started with warmth. Just the warmth of a coffee cup, pressed between her palms in the back of a taxi on a gray morning. She traced the rim again and again, a small, unconscious circle she always made when she was trying to hold her nerves still. The ceramic was warm. Too warm. As if it held something she was afraid to admit she wanted: heat, closeness, softness she never allowed herself. Later, she would wonder, have you ever felt someone enter your life in a way that changed your breathing before it changed anything else? That quiet question would haunt her, and maybe it lingers for you too. And if it does, stay close. Before we fall deeper into this story, if you love WLW tales filled with forbidden closeness, slow-burning desire, and tension you can feel under your skin, subscribe, like, and tell me if you have ever felt pulled towards someone you shouldn't want. The moment the opposite taxi doors swung open, everything that felt steady in Sophie shifted. A cold breeze rushed in first, lifting strands of her hair, then a silhouette stepped inside with too much urgency to apologize fast enough. She moved with the velocity of someone fighting the clock, and collided with Sophie's world as if that collision had been waiting to happen. A sleeve brushed Sophie's arm. Warm. Alive. Completely disarming. "Oh, God, I'm so sorry," the woman breathed, halfway inside the taxi, halfway out again. Her voice was soft but not fragile, more like a brushstroke across the air, something that altered the texture of the moment without trying. "I didn't mean to, I thought this was my ride. I'll get out." But Sophie's hand lifted slightly, an instinct she didn't understand. The ceramic cup trembled against her fingers. "You can stay," she said before thinking. "If you're going the same way." The stranger stilled. Fully. And when she finally turned her face towards Sophie, the morning light caught her features just enough to make something inside Sophie dip and steady at the same time. This was Anne. She didn't know her name yet, but Sophie already knew she would remember her. Anne's cheeks were flushed from rushing, her hair slightly mussed, her breath unsteady from the sprint. She smelled like citrus and faint paint, like someone who lived inside colors rather than rules. "I'm actually heading to the district near the promenade," Anne said, still catching her breath. "I'm late for my exhibition." Sophie blinked. "My office is next door." They stared for one beat too long. The taxi began moving, but neither of them shifted. The world outside blurred, but the air inside sharpened, warm, quiet, tense. "I never do that," Anne murmured. "Jump into the wrong cab." "It made my morning interesting," Sophie answered, surprising herself with the softness in her voice. Anne's lips curved into a smile, slow, warm, the kind that made the cab feel smaller. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, exposing the clean line of her jaw. Sophie shouldn't have noticed. She did. The motion felt intimate, even though it wasn't meant for her. "You work in law?" Anne asked, glancing at Sophie's tailored blazer, the careful posture she held like a shield. "Yeah. Early meetings, late nights, too many deadlines." And tilted her head, studying her. "You look like someone who does everything with intention." Sophie's breath stilled. Her thumb circled the cup again, slow, careful, betraying the nerves she didn't want him to see. Maybe, she managed. Another bump in the road jolted them slightly forward, sending their arms brushing again, barely, but enough for Sophie to feel the warmth through their coats. Her breath caught before she could hide it. Anne noticed. Of course she noticed. "Sorry," Anne murmured, her voice lower now. "It's okay," Sophie whispered, too quickly. The silence afterward wasn't empty. It was full. thick with new awareness. Soft with questions neither dared to ask. Sophie shifted again, trying to give herself space, but it didn't work. The taxi wasn't big enough, and it was too close, and the warmth of her presence seemed to follow Sophie wherever she moved. "You seem tense," and said gently. "Your hands, they're holding that cup like it might run away." Sophie looked down. Her fingers were indeed tight, knuckles pale from pressure. She inhaled slowly. "It's a habit." "A comforting one?" and asked. "I'm not sure." Anne's gaze softened. "I think you feel things quietly." Sophie felt something tighten, low and private, inside her chest. "You don't know me," she said, barely audible. "Maybe," and murmured, leaning back just enough for her knee to brush Sophie's again, "but I felt something when I sat down." Sophie's heartbeat stumbled. "And what exactly did you feel?" she asked, her voice smaller, rougher. And smiled with her eyes first, then her mouth. "An energy. Yours." Sophie swallowed, unsure whether the warmth she felt was embarrassment or something more dangerous. Her reflection in the window told the truth: flushed cheeks, parted lips, eyes drifting back to and as if pulled. They passed a streetlight, the glow flickering across Anne's face and catching on her lashes. Sophie watched the light move across her skin. Watched her mouth form the smallest, softest breath. Watched herself want something she didn't understand. The taxi slowed at another intersection, the sudden shift pressing their thighs together for half a second. Long enough for Sophie's pulse to jump. Long enough for Anne to inhale softly. They didn't pull away. "Sophie," Anne said, tasting her name like something warm. Sophie's breath shook. "Yeah. Can I ask you something?" "Okay. Why do you keep looking away from me right when things get quiet?" Sophie's pulse hammered. Her voice nearly broke. "Because I don't trust what I'm feeling." And leaned in, not enough to touch, but enough for Sophie to feel heat radiate from her skin. "You don't have to trust it yet," she whispered. "Just notice it." Sophie's hand lifted instinctively, wanting to settle near Anne's, close enough to touch, trembling at the edge of possibility. She stopped at the last moment, fingers hovering in the charged air between them. And looked down at the almost touch, then up with a warmth that shook Sophie's entire breath. "You were going to touch me," and whispered. Sophie couldn't finish. She didn't have the words. "That's all right," and murmured. Sometimes the body knows before the mind does. The taxi turned the final corner. Their destination approached. But neither of them moved. Neither of them breathed properly. Neither of them wanted the moment to end. "Sophie," Anne said again, softer now, deeper. "Whatever this is, it doesn't feel small." Sophie felt the truth land inside her, hot and impossible. "No," she whispered. "It doesn't." "And does it scare you?" Sophie hesitated, one heartbeat, two, then nodded. "Good," and breathed, her voice brushing Sophie's skin like warm air. "The things worth feeling usually do." The taxi rolled to a stop. Their hands hovered, still almost touching. Their breaths mingled, too close to be accidental. "Sophie," Anne whispered, leaving the sentence open, unfinished, trembling with invitation. And Sophie realized she wanted, desperately, to know how that sentence would end. Sophie hadn't meant to look back. She had stepped out of the taxi first, her legs unsteady, the cold morning air hitting her skin like reality trying to reclaim her. But something in her wouldn't move forward, not fully, not without one more glance, one more confirmation that the heat she felt wasn't imagined. And was still inside the cab, half turned toward her, sunlight catching in the soft threads of her hair. She looked almost unreal. Or maybe too real. Too immediate. too close to something Sophie wasn't ready to name. Their eyes met across the open door, quiet, charged, impossibly warm. It was supposed to be nothing. Just a shared taxi. Just a mistake of timing. Just an almost touch that shouldn't have mattered. But Sophie felt the air tighten between them, a soft pull in her chest. And felt it too. That was the dangerous part. "Good luck today," and whispered, her voice low enough that the wind almost stole it away. "You too," Sophie managed, though her throat wasn't steady. And stepped out, closing the distance between them more than she needed to. Their coats brushed, barely, lightly, and Sophie's breath stuttered at the subtle friction of wool against wool. The sidewalk was busy. People rushed past. The city moved on without noticing the two women standing too close, holding a moment they didn't know how to drop. "Maybe I'll see you again?" And asked, not smiling, not playing, just offering something that sounded dangerously sincere. Sophie forced herself to look away first. "Maybe," she said, though her pulse answered yes. She walked into the law firm's lobby feeling a heat under her skin that didn't match the cold air. Her reflection in the elevator doors betrayed everything she was trying to bury: flushed cheeks, parted lips, eyes that looked like they were waking up. Halfway to the 7th floor, she whispered to her own pulse, "What are you doing?" And the answer that rose inside her wasn't comforting. Hours later, work did nothing to quiet her. Every sound, a pen clicking, papers shuffling, her phone vibrating, felt sharper than usual, as if her senses had never fully come down from that taxi. The memory of Anne's breath brushing her cheek, the warmth of her thigh for that half second, the way she'd said Sophie's name, it all clung to her skin like static. At lunchtime, Sophie finally gave in and stepped outside to breathe. The sunlight was warmer now. Or maybe her body was. She didn't expect to see it again. Not so soon. But the universe kept choosing for her. And stood at the building's glass doors, hugging a portfolio to her chest, her eyes scanning the street. When she saw Sophie, something lit up in her expression, not a smile exactly, but a soft recognition that felt like a hand grazing the inside of Sophie's ribs. "Oh," and said, exhaling in relief. "I hoped I'd catch you." She hesitated, lowering her voice. "I left something in the taxi." Sophie's stomach tightened. What was it? A sketchbook. And lifted the portfolio slightly. "They found it. Said I could pick it up here because the building routes lost items? I don't know. I think the universe just wanted me to see you again." The words hit Sophie too hard, too honestly. Her breath skipped. Instead of responding, she gestured toward the lobby. "Come in. I'll help you find whoever handles that." They walked side by side, their steps just a bit too synchronized, heels tapping in a rhythm that felt like an unspoken conversation. The lobby was crowded, forcing them closer than either admitted they wanted. Their shoulders brushed once, then again, and neither moved away. When they reached the reception desk, the receptionist asked for the taxi company reference number. And opened her portfolio and pulled out a small card, but it slipped from her fingers, fluttering toward the floor. Both women reached for it at the same time. Both froze. Their hands hovered an inch apart over the card, wrists nearly touching, breaths overlapping. Sophie felt the warmth of Anne's skin before contact even happened, like heat radiating through the space between them. Her pulse jumped so sharply she almost pulled away. Anne didn't move. She looked directly at Sophie, the moment stretching, thickening, softening. The air around them grew warmer, the distance between them grew impossibly fragile. Sophie's chest rose slowly. And mirrored the movement, same inhale, same pace, like they'd fallen into a breath they were sharing. Then Sophie pulled back. A fraction of a second too late. And retrieved the card and nodded softly, as if she understood all the words Sophie couldn't say. While the receptionist searched the records and leaned in closer, close enough that Sophie felt the air shift. "Can I ask you something?" and whispered, her voice lower than before. Sophie swallowed. "Okay. Do I make you uncomfortable? Or is it something else?" Sophie's pulse hammered in her throat, shaking her answer loose before she could stop it. "You don't make me uncomfortable." And studied her, slowly, intensely. "That's not what I meant," she murmured. Heat flickered across Sophie's skin. Her breath betrayed her again, catching halfway through an exhale. They were too close. Far too close for Sophie's carefully curated life. Yet she didn't step away. "I don't know what this is," she confessed softly, each word a quiet surrender. "And let the moment breathe. Then maybe just feel it. Don't rush to explain it." A long silence stretched between them. Not awkward, weighted. Necessary. Their bodies angled toward each other without conscious intention. Sophie's hand brushed her own blazer to steady herself, but the movement only brought her fingertips closer to Anne's. When the sketchbook finally arrived, Anne took it with a grateful sigh, but Sophie noticed her hand trembling, just a little. "You okay?" Sophie asked. And met her gaze. "I am now." Something tightened in Sophie's stomach. Something warm. Something dangerous. They walked out together, their steps matching again. "What floor is your exhibition on?" Sophie asked, trying to sound casual. "Third," Anne said. "Want to see it?" Sophie shouldn't. She knew she shouldn't. Her afternoon schedule was packed. Her boss expected her back. Her entire life was built on boundaries. But when Anne spoke, her voice softened in a way that curled around Sophie's ribs. "It's small. Quiet. I think you'd like it." Sophie nodded before she could form a reason not to. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. They stepped in. It was small. Too small. The kind of space that demanded closeness. The doors slid shut. The elevator hummed. And the temperature shifted. Anne's perfume, citrus, paint, warm air, wrapped around Sophie like a slow exhale. Their shoulders brushed lightly as they turned. Sophie's breath stilled. Her skin prickled. And moved her portfolio to her other arm, the shift brushing her elbow against Sophie's. The touch lingered longer than it should have. Sophie's knees weakened. Anne noticed. Breathe, and whispered, as if she could feel the tightness building in Sophie's chest. "I am breathing," Sophie whispered back, though her voice wasn't convincing. "Try slower." And demonstrated, inhale, soft and deep. Sophie mirrored her. Their chests rose together. Their shoulders lifted together. Their bodies swayed closer with each breath, pulled by gravity or something stronger. With every inhale, the space between them shrank. With every exhale, Sophie's resistance did. When the elevator jolted to a brief stop between floors, their balance shifted, and Sophie instinctively reached out, grabbing the closest thing, Anne's forearm. Warm. Firm. Smooth beneath her fingers. Anne's breath caught. Sophie didn't let go. For one suspended second, their bodies aligned, Sophie's hand on Anne's arm, Anne's hand hovering just shy of Sophie's waist, both frozen in a moment that felt like the prelude to something neither of them had allowed themselves to want. "Sophie," Anne breathed. The sound of her name in that tone nearly undid her. And leaned in, barely, enough for her breath to brush Sophie's cheek. Sophie turned toward the warmth without meaning to. Their mouths hovered inches apart, brushing the edge of possibility. "Are we?" Sophie started, voice trembling. "Not yet," and whispered, her lips almost kissing the words against Sophie's skin. "But we will." Sophie's knees felt unsteady. Her pulse fluttered like wings. The elevator resumed its movement. They stepped apart too quickly, both trying to reclaim their breath. The doors opened to a quiet hallway lined with framed art. And walked out first, then paused, waiting for Sophie. When Sophie joined her, Anne's fingers brushed hers, light, fleeting, but unmistakably intentional. "Maybe after the exhibition," Anne murmured, "you'll let yourself stay with this feeling a little longer." Sophie didn't answer, not out loud. But her hand stayed close to Anne's all the way down the hallway, each step a quiet promise neither dared to speak yet. The gallery lights were soft, warm patches of gold that fell across the walls in gentle waves. But the air between Sophie and Anne felt warmer still, as if every spotlight leaned in to witness the gravity slowly forming between them. And unlocked the small exhibition room with a quiet click. When the door opened, the scent of paint, varnish, and something faintly sweet drifted into the hallway. Sophie didn't know how she'd follow Anne inside without losing the last bit of composure she had left. But she did. The door shut behind them with a sound too intimate for a public building, soft, final, in closing. Sophie swallowed. And walked ahead of her, only a few steps, but the space was narrow enough that her coat brushed Sophie's hip. Their bodies aligned in a way that felt less like coincidence and more like inevitability. Sophie felt the warmth of Anne's presence even when they weren't touching, an energy humming just beneath her skin. "These are mine," Anne said, gesturing to a row of framed pieces. "They're small compared to what I usually..." She stopped when she turned back and saw Sophie staring not at the art, but at her. Sophie blinked, flustered. "Sorry. I'm listening." A soft smile curved Anne's lips. "You feel present. Intensely present." Sophie's breath caught. "I don't feel like myself today." "Maybe you're more yourself than ever," Anne murmured. The words slipped under Sophie's skin like warm light. Anne stepped closer, not intentionally, not aggressively, just naturally. As if her body knew where it wanted to be before her mind did. Sophie shifted her weight, and the movement drew her even closer, until there was barely a hand's width between their coats. "Look," Anne said softly, touching the frame of a painting. "This one. I made it during a week when I felt everything too much." Sophie leaned in to look at the piece, an abstract wash of soft blues and burning reds. But she didn't stand beside Anne. She stood behind her, close enough that Anne's hair brushed Sophie's cheek when she tilted her head. Sophie froze. And didn't move away. That tiny brush of hair, fine, warm, faintly perfumed, felt like a match drawn across the surface of Sophie's skin. Her breath hitched, and she took in a slow inhale that wasn't hers alone. Anne's breathing changed too, quieter, deeper. "This painting," Anne whispered, "is about wanting something you can't explain." Sophie felt her knees weaken. "I think I understand that." And turned her head slightly, slow, cautious, seeking permission with nothing but the softening of her eyes. Sophie didn't retreat. Her breath collided with Anne's, warm and trembling. Proximity had stopped being accidental. It had become language. And lifted her hand to the next frame. "And this one is about hesitation." Sophie barely heard the explanation. She was too focused on the space between their bodies, shrinking, reshaping, breathing with them. She stepped closer, pretending to examine the painting, but her chest brushed lightly against Anne's shoulder. And inhaled sharply. "That's very close," and whispered. "You're the one who stopped walking," Sophie breathed back. And turned fully this time, facing her. Their coats brushed. Their hands almost touched. Their breaths mingled in a slow, fragile rhythm. Sophie felt herself tremble. Anne's eyes dropped to Sophie's lips. not long. Not obvious. Just long enough for Sophie to feel the pull low in her stomach. The world around them softened at the edges. "You can tell me to stop," and murmured. Sophie swallowed, her throat tight. "I don't want you to," and stepped forward, a subtle shift of weight, a question asked with her body rather than words. Sophie answered without speaking. She lifted her chin slightly, enough to close another inch of space, and mirrored her tiny, delicate movements that carried more heat than an embrace. Their foreheads nearly touched, and exhaled, and Sophie felt the warmth of her breath slide across her lips. The sensation was small, but it cracked something inside her, something she'd kept locked away for years. "Sophie," and whispered, low and reverent. Sophie's hand rose without permission, stopping just short of Anne's cheek. Her fingers trembled in the space between them. "I'm scared," she admitted, voice thin. "I am too," Anne murmured. "But look at us. Neither of us is stepping back." Sophie's breath stuttered, and leaned in, slow, painfully slow, until their noses brushed. Sophie closed her eyes at the contact, her entire body tightening around the fragile moment. Then Anne paused, waiting, asking, giving Sophie the choice. Sophie opened her eyes, and in the tiny space between them, she whispered, "Please." That was all it took. And closed the last inch in a breath, her lips meeting Sophie's in a kiss so soft it barely existed, yet so devastating it felt like a world collapsing inward. It wasn't hot, not yet. It wasn't deep. It was trembling, hesitant, reverent. But the warmth shot through Sophie's body like a pulse. And kissed her again, another featherlight press, as if learning the shape of Sophie's mouth through touch alone. Sophie's hand finally found Anne's cheek, cupping it gently, anchoring herself. Anne's fingers slid up Sophie's coat, gripping lightly at her waist, not pulling, just holding, seeking certainty. Their breaths tangled in the small space between kisses. The world narrowed to skin, warmth, the faint taste of citrus paint on Anne's lips. When Anne deepened the kiss only slightly, just the faintest increase in pressure, Sophie felt something melt inside her. Her knees softened. Her heart stumbled. It was too much. And not enough. And pulled back first, but just barely. Their noses brushed. Their breaths mingled. Sophie chased the kiss without meaning to, and then let out a soft, trembling sound that nearly undid them both. "Wait," Sophie whispered, breathing hard. Just a second." And rested her forehead against Sophie's. "Okay." Their hands stayed exactly where they were, Sophie's against her cheek, hands at her waist. Neither woman let go. Sophie felt the shape of the moment heavy in her chest. "I shouldn't have, I don't know what I'm doing." And smiled, breathless. "You kissed me like you did." "That's the problem," Sophie whispered. Anne's thumb brushed Sophie's coat at her waist, a barely there gesture, but intimate enough to steal her breath. "Sophie, we don't have to figure out the whole story today. Just this moment." Sophie's eyes fluttered shut. "And what does this moment say?" "That we want each other," Anne said softly. "And that scares you?" Sophie exhaled shakily. "It does. It scares me too." They stood like that, bodies aligned, breaths shared, lips still tingling from the softness they weren't ready to repeat but couldn't forget. Then a noise echoed from the hallway, a door opening, footsteps approaching. Sophie jumped back as if waking from a trance, her eyes wide, her breath uneven. And froze, watching her retreat. "I'm sorry," Sophie breathed. "I didn't mean, I can't." "You can," Anne said gently. "You did. That's what scares me." and took one step forward, but Sophie flinched, not away from Anne, but away from her own trembling desire. "I need," Sophie whispered, her voice breaking, "a minute." And nodded slowly, her expression soft, steady. "Take whatever you need." Sophie turned toward the door, gripping the handle as if it could hold her together. She didn't walk through it. Not yet. But she held it tightly, like she needed an anchor. Behind her, and spoke in a voice barely above a breath. "Sophie, this isn't over." The words hit Sophie's back like heat. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I know." The door to the exhibition room closed softly behind Sophie, but the echo of the kiss did not leave with her. It lingered on her lips like warmth that refused to fade, like breath trapped under her skin. She walked down the hallway in a daze, the hum of the building louder than usual, every footstep feeling like a betrayal of the moment she'd just run from. The symbolic anchor returned to her unbidden. The warmth of the coffee cup, the small circle her thumb always traced when she was holding herself together. Now she recognized why she had clung to that warmth so tightly. She had been starving for heat long before and touched her. And now she couldn't unfeel it. Sophie stopped at the water fountain, pressed her palms against the cold metal, and tried to steady herself. Her breath wavered. Her reflection on the small, polished surface was all panic-softened edges and flushed cheeks. She didn't know how long she stood there before and appeared at the end of the hall. She didn't say anything. She didn't move closer. She simply waited, giving Sophie space while looking at her like she was the only thing in the room that mattered. The restraint was almost worse than the kiss had been. Sophie let out a fragile exhale. "And, please," and took one slow step forward. "I'm here." "That's the problem," Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. "You're here and I don't know how to hold this without breaking something inside me." Anne's expression softened, but her breathing shifted, deeper, warmer, unmistakably aware. "You're shaking," Anne said quietly. "I know. Is it because of me?" Sophie closed her eyes, unable to lie. "Yes." A charged silence wrapped around them, thickening the air. And moved closer, not fully, just enough that Sophie could feel her presence like warmth against her cold skin. "You ran," Anne murmured. "I panicked." "I know. But the way you kissed me," Anne's voice dipped, intimate, breath-lined. "Sophie, that wasn't panic." Sophie's inhale fractured. "I don't know what it was," she whispered. "I just know it felt like falling." And approached another half step, and now they were close enough to see each other's breathing. Sophie's chest rose shallowly, Anne's rose slow and steady, like she was offering Sophie something to anchor to. "Falling isn't always bad," Anne whispered. "Sometimes it ruins everything." Sophie's voice broke at the edges. "My family, my coworkers. I've lived my whole life knowing exactly what I'm supposed to want. And now She couldn't finish. And reached out, slowly, carefully, fingers hovering in the air. She didn't touch Sophie. She didn't dare, not without permission. She held her hand a breath away from Sophie's own, close enough that Sophie felt the heat radiating from her skin. It was overwhelming. "Can I?" Anne asked softly. Sophie didn't step back. But she didn't move forward either. Her breath trembled. "I don't know." So Anne didn't touch her. But she didn't drop her hand either. They stood like that, almost touching, not touching, heat humming in the little space between them like a live wire. Finally, Anne withdrew her hand with a trembling exhale. The absence hurt more than a touch would have. Sophie forced herself to breathe. To speak. To stop drowning in silence. "I didn't want to run," she whispered. But when someone walked in, everything inside me collapsed. Like I was caught doing something wrong. You weren't doing anything wrong, Anne said, and the tenderness in her voice was devastating. You were kissing me. And I was kissing you back. Sophie stared at the floor. If my family saw me. She didn't finish. She didn't have to. And nodded slowly, her eyes full of understanding she hadn't earned but offered freely. Fear is loud, and murmured. But desire whispers. And sometimes the whisper wins. Sophie's breath caught. This isn't a whisper. It feels like, she pressed her trembling fingers to her lips. It feels like something is burning in me. Anne's voice softened further, barely a breath. And does it feel wrong? Sophie's eyes lifted to hers. No, she whispered. It scares me because it feels right. Anne's expression shifted, something like hope, something like relief, but she stayed where she was. She didn't rush forward. She didn't reach. She simply let the moment breathe. You're allowed to feel this, Anne said. Even if you're not ready to say it. Sophie turned away, pacing a few steps before stopping again. The corridor lights flickered faintly, casting moving shadows across her face. She pressed her thumb against her palm, tracing that same small circle again and again. The warmth of the coffee cup. Her symbolic anchor. Now tinged with the memory of Anne's lips. Anne noticed. You're doing that thing again, she said softly. The circle. Sophie froze. I didn't realize. You always do it when you're fighting yourself. Sophie's throat tightened. I am fighting myself. And swallowed, audibly. And am I part of that fight? Sophie turned toward her slowly, each breath hard-earned. Yes, she whispered. You're the whole thing. And inhaled, sharp, quiet, wanting. Without thinking, Sophie took a step closer. Then another. Until their bodies stood in a fragile alignment again, close enough for heat to rise between them. Anne's voice broke slightly. Sophie. Don't talk, Sophie said, her breath unsteady. Just stay right there. She reached up, hesitant, trembling, and lifted Anne's collar just enough to smooth a wrinkle. Her knuckles brushed Anne's skin, a feather-light touch that made them both inhale sharply. It wasn't a kiss. But it felt like one. Anne closed her eyes, letting the warmth travel through her. Why does that feel like more than it is? Because it is, Sophie whispered. Their foreheads almost touched again, the same magnetic fate pulling them into each other's gravity. But Sophie held still, just barely. She didn't close the distance this time. She let it ache. I don't know how to want you without breaking my life, Sophie confessed. And opened her eyes, and the look she gave Sophie could have melted steel. You don't have to break anything today, Anne whispered. Just don't lie to yourself. Sophie's breath trembled violently, tears pressing at the corners of her eyes, not sadness, not exactly, but a pressure she couldn't hold inside anymore. Anne lifted her hand, slow, gentle, asking permission with her hesitation. Sophie almost let her touch her. Almost. But at the last heartbeat, Sophie stepped back. Don't, she whispered. If you touch me right now, I'm afraid I won't stop. Anne's eyes darkened with longing, with restraint, with the pain of wanting. I know, Anne said. That's why I hesitated. Silence wrapped around them, thick, trembling. Anne took a shaky breath. I'm not asking for anything more than honesty. Just tell me you felt what I felt. Sophie's lips parted. But she couldn't say it. Not out loud. Not yet. Instead, she reached for her phone with unsteady hands. and watched her, breath shallow. Sophie typed something. Paused. Deleted it. Typed again. Deleted again. And stepped closer, not touching, but close enough that Sophie felt the air shift. What were you going to say? Anne whispered. Sophie's eyes glistened as she locked her phone. I don't know how to put it into words. Then show me, Anne murmured. Sophie shook her head, torn, trembling. If I show you, I won't be able to pretend this is small. Anne's voice softened to almost nothing. It isn't small. Sophie reached for the door, her hand hovering, unable to push it open, and took one breath toward her. Sophie. Sophie whispered back, without turning around, her voice aching with fear and want. Don't follow me. Please. And with a trembling exhale, she slipped out, the door closing only halfway behind her, an unfinished gesture, a half-escaped desire, a choice she hadn't fully made. And stood motionless in the middle of the hallway, staring at the door Sophie hadn't been able to close completely. It was almost a vow. Almost a surrender. Almost a beginning. Almost. Sophie didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed with her phone on her chest, the half-typed message she never sent still echoing inside her ribs like a pulse she couldn't quiet. The apartment was silent, the kind of silence that amplifies breath and memory, and every time she closed her eyes she felt Anne's lips again, soft, trembling, devastating in their sweetness. She tried to push it down, to bury it under logic, fear, and the familiar shape of the life she'd built. But wanting had changed texture. It wasn't abstract anymore. It had Anne's breath. Anne's warmth. Anne's hands hovering at her waist as if she were something precious. Around 3 a.m., Sophie rose from bed, restless. Her thumb traced an unconscious circle over the rim of a mug she wasn't drinking from. The same movement she made in the taxi. The same movement Anne had noticed. It didn't calm her this time. It only reminded her that she wanted heat, not restraint. She whispered into the dim kitchen air, I can't keep pretending I don't feel this. The truth landed softly. And once spoken, it refused to loosen its grip. Morning arrived pale and cold, but something inside Sophie felt warmer, tender, aching, unresolved. She dressed slowly, choosing a softer blouse than usual, something that made her feel less like an argument and more like a confession waiting to happen. At work, she couldn't focus. Every document felt heavier. Every fluorescent light felt too bright. Every heartbeat felt too loud. By noon, she knew she couldn't stay. She slipped out of the office with shaking hands and walked toward the gallery without thinking. Her breath fogged in the winter air, her palms were warm despite the cold. The city felt strangely quiet, as if it were waiting for her to finally stop running. When she stepped inside the building, the elevator doors were closing. She saw a flash of familiar dark hair. And, wait! The doors paused, then slid open again. And stood inside, portfolio in her arms, eyes widening in soft, startled hope. Something fragile and warm flickered in her expression, something Sophie had wanted to see again since the moment she walked away. Sophie, and breathed, her voice dipping into that tone that always unraveled something inside her. Are you okay? No, Sophie said. But I think I could be. If you don't walk away. Anne's inhale was sharp, emotional. She stepped aside, giving Sophie room to enter the elevator. When the doors closed, the small space wrapped around them like a held breath. They didn't touch. They didn't speak. They just stood there, heat filling the inches between them. Finally, Sophie whispered, I'm sorry. For leaving like that. For being scared. For making you think I didn't want. She couldn't finish. And stepped closer, slow, careful, seeking permission in every inch she moved. "What do you want?" she asked softly. Sophie felt the world narrow to the sound of Anne's breath. "You." The word came out trembling. It felt like stepping into light after living too long in shadow. Anne's eyes softened, filled with a tenderness so warm it almost hurt. "Sophie," she whispered, voice breaking, "I wanted to hear that more than you know." The elevator stopped at the 3rd floor, but neither of them moved. Anne lifted a hand, slowly, so slowly, giving Sophie time to pull back. She didn't. Anne's fingertips brushed her jaw in the gentlest caress, just a whisper of skin against skin. Sophie's breath faltered hard, her eyes fluttering shut for a moment. "That's okay, right?" Anne asked, her voice so quiet it felt like an exhale. "Yes," Sophie breathed, leaning into the touch. "Please don't stop." Anne framed her cheek more fully, her thumb grazing a soft line beneath Sophie's eye. The tenderness almost undid her. "You ran because you were scared," Anne murmured. "Yes. And you came back because..." Sophie opened her eyes. There was no hiding now. "Because the fear didn't matter as much as wanting you." Anne's lips parted. Her breath trembled. "Come here." Their bodies met slowly, naturally, as if gravity had been trying to guide them into each other all along. Anne's hand slid gently to Sophie's waist, not pulling her in, but inviting her closer. Sophie stepped forward, melting into the warmth she'd been aching for. Their foreheads touched. Their breaths synced. Their hearts steadied into the same fragile rhythm. "Sophie," Anne whispered, "look at me." She did. And Anne kissed her, softly, slowly, with the kind of tenderness that tasted like forgiveness. The kiss wasn't urgent. It wasn't hungry. It was warm, careful, full of unspoken truth. Their lips brushed, paused, brushed again with deeper longing. Sophie curled her fingers lightly at the back of Anne's neck, pulling her closer with a trembling desire she no longer tried to hide. And let out a soft sound, half breath, half ache, that drifted down Sophie's spine like heat. Their bodies aligned more fully, warmth gathering in every place they touched, breath warming the space between lingering kisses. When they finally separated, barely, Sophie rested her hands against Anne's chest, feeling her heartbeat. "I can't promise I won't get scared again," Sophie whispered. "You don't have to promise anything," Anne murmured, brushing a thumb across Sophie's lower lip. "Just don't disappear." Sophie exhaled shakily. "I won't," and kissed her forehead with a gentleness that flooded Sophie's chest. "Good. Because I'm not going anywhere." When they stepped out into the hallway, Sophie instinctively reached for something, anything, to ground herself. Her hand found the warm ceramic mug she'd left on a bench earlier, the symbolic anchor of all her restlessness. And saw it. She smiled. Then she wrapped her hand over Sophie's, guiding her thumb into that familiar circle. Warm. Steady. Changed. "You don't need this anymore," Anne whispered. "Not when you have me." Sophie's throat tightened. "I didn't realize how cold I'd been until you touched me." And leaned in, her lips grazing Sophie's cheek in a slow, breathy near kiss. "Warmth always returns when you stop fighting it." Sophie closed her eyes, letting the truth settle. She wasn't falling anymore. She was choosing. And the choosing felt like a kind of freedom she had never allowed herself to imagine. And, Sophie whispered, "I want to be brave with you." And rested her forehead against Sophie's again. "You already are." For a long moment, they stood wrapped in quiet heat, hands entwined, breaths mingling, two women remade by the tenderness they'd been afraid to want. Sophie opened her eyes, voice barely a breath. "Tell me something true." And smiled softly. I think desire is just courage that finally stopped pretending. Sophie let that settle into her bones. Then she whispered, "Do you think everyone has a moment like this, when wanting someone becomes the most honest thing you've ever done?" Before we go, tell me in the comments, have you ever felt something so real it scared you, but you wanted it anyway? If you love WLW stories filled with tension, breath, longing, and slow burn surrender, remember to subscribe, like, and share your heart in the comments. Thank you for stepping into this story with me.